Well, good evening. We are going to be continuing in the life of Moses tonight, and if you have a Bible and want to follow along with us, we're going to be in Exodus chapter 32 for the most part, but this passage is one of those passages that doesn't just stop right neatly at the end of chapter 32, and it's a really good thing too. This one goes on from chapter 32 and even into 33 and even a little bit into 34. And I'm so thankful for that, because if this story stopped at the end of 32, it would stop in a really, really bad place for God's people in the wilderness. In fact, if the story ended in chapter 32, it would stop with God putting his foot down and saying, I'm not going with you any further. Whoa. How do we get here? Well, that's what we're going to find out tonight. To me, this is one of the most important stories in the Old Testament. And it's also just a really well-written story, too. At times it's kind of humorous. At other times it's tragic. Most of all, it is just this really powerful demonstration of loyalty and love and leadership on the part of Moses, and also patience and forgiveness on the part of God as he shows his steadfast love even when his people just totally rebel against him. So this is the story of Moses and the golden calf. And I've actually enlisted a little bit of help tonight in sharing this story with you. Guys who are helping me with reading, you can go ahead and get ready to do that. So as I mentioned, this story goes from 32 to 33 and chapter 34 even a little bit. And there's just so much of it that I want you to hear tonight. And I don't want to just stand up here and talk about it. I want you to hear it, the story. And so what I've done is I've kind of divided up the parts of this story so that we have someone reading Moses' part and the Lord's part and Aaron's part and the people's part, and I'll read the parts in between. And what you're going to hear, it's kind of like Reader's Theater almost. You're going to hear the story. Besides one little summary comment in the middle for sake of time, everything you're going to hear is just straight from the pages of Scripture itself. So I'm hoping that this will help us to hear this important story with fresh eyes. So readers, if everybody's ready, let's go ahead and begin. Exodus 32 and verse 1. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said,
Come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him.
And Aaron answered them,
Take off the gold earrings that your wives, your sons, and your daughters are wearing, and bring them to me.
So all the people took off their earrings and brought them to Aaron. He took what they handed him and made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. Then they said,
These are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt.
And when Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf and announced,
Tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord.
So the next day the people rose early and sacrificed burnt offerings and presented fellowship offerings. And afterward they sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in revelry. Then the Lord said to Moses,
Go down, because your people whom you brought up out of Egypt have become corrupt. They've been quick to turn away from what I commanded them and have made themselves an idol cast in the shape of a calf. They have bowed down to it and sacrificed to it and have said, These are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. I've seen these people, and they are a stiff-necked people. Now leave me alone so that my anger may burn against them and I may destroy them. Then I'll make you into a great nation.
But Moses sought the favor of the Lord his God.
Lord, why should your anger burn against your people, whom you brought out of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say, It was with evil intent that he brought them out, to kill them in the mountains and to wipe them off the face of the earth. Turn from your fierce anger, relent, and do not bring disaster on your people. Remember your servants Abraham, Isaac, Israel, to whom you swore by your own self, I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and I will give your descendants all this land I promised them, and it will be their inheritance forever.
Then the Lord relented and did not bring on his people the disaster he had threatened. Moses turned and went down the mountain with the 2 tablets of the covenant law in his hands. But when Moses approached the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, his anger burned, and he threw the tablets out of his hands, breaking them to pieces at the foot of the mountain. And he took the calf the people had made and burned it in the fire. Then he ground it into powder, scattered it on the water, and made the Israelites drink it. And he said to Aaron,
What did these people do to you that you led them into such great sin?
Do not be angry, my lord. You know how prone these people are to evil. They said to me, make us a god who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses, who brought us out of Egypt, we do not know what happened to him. So I told them, whoever has any gold jewelry, take it off. Then they gave me the gold, and I threw it into the fire, and out came this calf.
Moses said that the people were running wild, and Aaron had let them get out of control and so become a laughingstock to their enemies. So he stood at the entrance of the camp and said,
Whoever is for the Lord, come to me.
And all the Levites rallied to him. And at this point, Moses is going to give them instructions about the punishment that God is bringing on them. And 3,000 people die on that very day. But even still, Moses fears that there's more trouble looming for his people. So, verse 30, the next day Moses said to the people,
You have committed a great sin, but now I will go up to the Lord. Perhaps I can make atonement for your sin.
Then the Lord said to Moses,
Leave this place, you and the people who brought you up out of Egypt. I will send an angel before you and drive out the Canaanites, Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. Go up to the land flowing with milk and honey, but I will not go with you because you are a stiff-necked people, and I might destroy you on the way.
Then Moses said to him,
If your presence does not go with us, do not send us up from here. How will anyone know that you are pleased with me and with your people unless you go with us? What else will distinguish me and your people from all the other people on the face of the earth?
I will do the very thing you have asked, because I am pleased with you, and I know you by name.
Now show me your glory.
Then the Lord came down in the cloud and stood there with him and proclaimed his name, the Lord. And he passed in front of Moses, proclaiming,
The Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and the children's children to the 3rd and 4th generation.
Moses bowed down to the ground at once and worshipped.
Lord, if I have found favor in your eyes, then let the Lord go with us. Although this is a stiff-necked people, forgive our weakness and our sin and take us as your inheritance.
I am making a covenant with you. Before all your people, I will do wonders never before done in any nation in all the world. The people who live among you will see awesomeness in the work that I, the Lord, will do for you. Obey what I commanded you today.
So that is the story of Moses and the golden calf. Big thanks to those of you who helped with the reading of it. I hope that maybe that experience helped to bring that story to life for you, and also just hearing it read at its length here. I think that I agree with someone named Peter Enns who said that this passage kind of has 3 turning points to it, much like the Bible itself, and much like our lives as well. 3 turning points: rebellion, mediation, and restoration. And each one of those things is something that I can relate with, something that speaks to me. Now, to be fair, there are some things about this passage, and maybe you noticed some too as we read it together tonight, that maybe I don't so easily relate with. I have never once in my life felt the urge or impulse to take all the jewelry in the house and take all the necklaces and earrings and make it into a golden calf. Like, I can't relate with that at all. I certainly have never thrown any gold into the oven and just all of a sudden, out came this calf, as Aaron would have us believe. Nice try, Aaron. I don't think we're going to believe that one. But I don't know that seems like something really far from our world, doesn't it? And maybe something else you might have noticed as we read that together. I have read this story like several times this week, and I'm still not entirely clear what Israel's trying to do here. Why did they make this golden calf? Were they trying to make a new God for themselves? Were they trying to make an image of the true God? I get kind of mixed signals about it. In verse 5, Aaron talked about wanting to throw a festival to the Lord and have this golden calf there, which makes you kind of think that they're trying to represent God with this calf. But then the other people are talking about making gods who will go before them, almost like a replacement to God. I'm not really sure what they're trying to do here. And in some sense, maybe it doesn't matter, because either one of those things is clearly rebellion, right? I mean, it's breaking either 10 Commandment number 1 or 10 Commandment number 2, or both. 10 Commandment number 1 was, you shall have no other gods, none of them. 10 Commandment number 2 was, don't make a graven image. That means of God or any other thing that you're going to want to worship. None of that. And as Colby showed us last week in his lesson, the people know these things. They have made this covenant with the people, or with their God, and either way you look at it, it's rebellion. What they're doing here. And I've never made a golden calf in my life. I don't think you have either. But I think also, on the other side of the coin, maybe I can relate a little with this impulse to want to control God. Isn't that what idolatry is? Isn't that in large part what the story of sin is from the beginning of time? Like when the first humans sinned against what they knew was best and what God had told them, they took of the fruit that they were told would make them like God. That's what they wanted to be. And here at Mount Sinai, when the people are tired of waiting on Moses, and they're tired of waiting on God, they're tired of wrestling with this period of time where they're waiting to hear from him and they don't hear it, and he doesn't seem like he's there with them. Finally, they say, just give us something we can see, right? Give us something we can hold, and we'll go forward with that. Like, no more waiting to follow God's lead. We're going to take charge ourselves. It's like what we read in our scripture reading from Isaiah 46, which describes idolatry as a god you can carry. Some pour out gold from their bags and weigh out silver on their scales. They hire a goldsmith to make it into a god, and they bow down and worship it. They lift it to their shoulders and carry it. They set it up in its place, and there it stands. And maybe in a superficial sense, there's something kind of appealing about that. This is a God who's not going to tell you what to do or how to live. No. That's up for you to decide. This is a God who's not going to challenge you to be different than you are. He's going to look exactly how you make him to look. And you're the one shaping him, not the other way around. This is a God that is on your terms, not on God's terms. And maybe that sounds appealing for a little while, until we realize that no matter if you want that or not, it's just not what really is. Until we realize that it's just that little voice of pride that says, my way is the best way. Israel, you may have noticed in what we read, is called prideful. Well, they're called stiff-necked, stubborn. 4 times in those 3 chapters. They're described as a people who have convinced themselves that their way is the best way. And so they make up this God who's not going to question that or tell them any differently. Maybe there's some appeal to that at first. Maybe there's some appeal in the kind of God that you realize is going to be visible to you when you want to see it at first. But at the end, this God that they make is really just born out of fear, isn't it? So Israel, they've been waiting for Moses. They've been waiting for God to do something. And all that time, their trust is just kind of wearing thin. We don't know what happened to Moses. They get kind of antsy. They get impatient. They're worn down with anxiousness. Their trust is worn thin. In those moments, it's kind of tempting to want something you can wrap your hands around, something nearby that you can put your anxieties on. But as that verse in Isaiah says, that idol, it can't carry you. It can't answer you. It can't save you. But uncertainty, maybe it makes us reach for it anyway. And that's how idols are made. Really, that's how rebellion is made. How much of the Bible is made by these things? Pride or panic and fear. The erosion of trust in a difficult time. How much of my struggles, how much of our struggles, maybe they come from those same things. This impulse to put self over God and say, my way is the best. Rebellion. That's the first turn in this story. And it's a real problem. It's like a really, real perilous problem when you see how this goes for the people of Israel. As we saw in the scriptures, they provoke God to the point that he's even saying, I'll just start over with you, Moses. I'll go with you, but they can go. I'm not going to go with them. Rebellion. It's a really dangerous thing. But praise God, the story doesn't end with rebellion. Right on its heels, we have Acts 2, mediation. And this is something that as Christians we ought to relate with very deeply. Because just as things are looking like they can't get any worse, and just as things are beginning to look like Israel's just going to reap the consequences of these things that they have done. Moses steps in on their behalf and he pleads for them. In my mind, this is probably the single greatest thing Moses does in his whole illustrious life of leadership, because here's God, and God is threatening to just wipe the whole people out. What does Moses say? Forgive them instead. If you choose to blot them out, blot me out too. Like the nerve of Moses to stand before God on behalf of these rebellious people that are driving him up a wall, and yet still he cares for them so much. That's how loyal he is. And God says to Moses, I will go with you. I'll go with you. But Moses says, if you will not go with us, then don't send us at all. That's Moses' plea before his God. He says, we are your people. And sometimes we seek after things we shouldn't want. And we think we want a God that we can carry and hold in our hands, but what we really need is a God who can carry us. And that's what that passage in Isaiah describes. It talks about idolatry as a God you can carry, and it says, you don't want that. What you really want is this. Listen to me, O house of Jacob, and all the remnant of the house of Israel, who have been born by me from before your birth, carried from the womb. Even to your old age I am he, and to gray hairs I will carry you. I have made, and I will bear. I will carry, and I will save. And Moses pleads to God on behalf of his stubborn people that God will do exactly that once again. And Moses had no part in the idolatry. You remember how mad he got when he gets down the mountain and he sees it? This rebellion that he had no part of. And yet, he numbers himself among the transgressors, like Isaiah says. He says, forgive us, pardon us. He mediates because he loves. And don't you think that in this we just get this beautiful glimpse of the whole thing, of God's story, God's glory, what God is going to do for us in Jesus, what Christ has done for you and me today. Christ, who had no part in the rebellion of sin, Christ, who didn't go down that path whatsoever, more so than Moses even, a perfect example, and yet he willingly chooses to become one of us in humanity. He stands with us, he stands up for us. He bears our griefs and our sorrows. He even, in 2 Corinthians, it says he became sin. He had no sin, but he became sin. His blood was a mediator for us. And because of what Christ did, God relents. And God restores, which means he gives yet another chance. Just like he does when Moses mediates, he gives another chance to God's people. From that point forward, God, as we read, renews that covenant with his people. He promises to go with them, not just Moses, but everyone, his people. And he calls them once more to obey him, and he really means it. But he also reminds them of who he is, a God who is merciful and gracious, slow to anger, and abounding in love and faithfulness. And this God is not going to be slow to bring justice to those who are disobedient, but he is 1,000 times faster to forgive wickedness, rebellion, and sin. And he promises that he's going to go with his people. And because of Jesus, that same thing is true for us today. Though once rebels, we may be restored by the power of Christ's blood, because like Moses, Jesus, even more so, is a mediator on our behalf. He stood with us. He stood up for us. He saved us from our own rebellion so that we might learn to humble ourselves before God and lay whatever it is that's our idol down, those things we take pride in, those things we reach for in anxious times when it feels like God is not as near and close as we want him to be. Lay our idols down and those things we carry so that God can carry us all the way to our true home. We're going to sing a song as an invitation song that you know well, Kneel at the Cross. That song fits so perfectly with what Moses has done and what Jesus has done. It's about Christ who intercedes for us, and it even has a line in it about laying our idols down. We don't make golden calves, you and me. But pride and fear can cause us to lose our trust and rebel. And this is a time for us to reflect and also rejoice in what Christ has done for us while we stand and while we sing.